Pentru că trebuie să privim toate aceste evoluții cu un optimism foarte reținut, cum bine spun invitații mei. Toate statele membre NATO, toate statele membre ale Uniunii Europene iau măsuri extrem de serioase în legătură cu amenințarea Rusiei. Putin nu dă niciun fel de semn că ar vrea să încheie acest război. Și în continuarea vizitelor extrem de importante care au loc la București, ieri și astăzi s-a aflat în România ambasadorul SUA la NATO, Julianne Smith. Doamna ambasador e o persoană cu o reputație excepțională și a transmis aici niște mesaje la București care vizează în mod direct România. Am participat la dialogul cu ambasadorul SUA la NATO aici la București și am întrebat-o pe Julianne Smith câți militari americani vor veni în România, pentru cât timp și care sunt intențiile Statelor Unite în legătură cu țara noastră în contextul în care noi suntem în prima linie a acestei confruntări și Rusia încearcă sub orice chip să provoace statele membre NATO și să destabilizeze profund bazinul Mării Negre. Urmărim afirmațiile extrem de importante ale ambasadorului SUA la NATO, Julianne Smith.
Ambassador Smith, Radu Tudor, Antena 3, would you please give us as many details as you can about the U.S. military presence in Romania? How many U.S. troops will be in our country until the end of the decision? For how long? If the U.S. troops will be part of the NATO BG, and what will be the connection between the U.S. troops' presence in Romania and the NATO response force? Thank you.
On the U.S. troop presence, I guess I'd back up to what happened in the days leading up to February 24th and the days right after. And in that case, actually, I have to back up even further. So after Russia's attempted annexation of Crimea, what the United States and allies decided to do was to make, as you know, major changes to NATO posture in Eastern Europe, but also the United States in particular decided to pre-position more equipment in Eastern Europe, well, really across all of Europe, and leave more enablers in place so that if it came to a moment when the alliance needed to respond quickly, the United States and other allies would have what they needed in place to move rapidly. Now, fast forward from the years between 2014 up to 2022, once it was clear that Russia was going into Ukraine, the United States was able to surge forces into Romania and other locations almost immediately. And they were able to do that because of the work that they had invested post-2014 in terms of, again, pre-positioning. So the United States responded quickly. We moved strikers into Romania. It was about 1,000 troops initially. Since then, there's been a plus up above and beyond that, 3,000 troops at the moment that are here rotating through. Then on top of it, what happened in Madrid is President Biden went out and made a new announcement. And the new announcement is that the United States is going to be adding a rotational BCT, Brigade Combat Team, in Romania with a headquarters, and those troops will be rotating in and out on a regular basis. We call it a persistent presence, and the details on that will be forthcoming. I don't have anything else to share. That was a big moment for our bilateral relationship and for the NATO alliance to see that additional commitment the United States is prepared to make to Romania. And what happened is other allies stepped up with similar commitments to make in places like the Baltic states and beyond, because collectively the alliance has decided that we need to move from battalions, the 8 battalions that are in Eastern Europe, to scalable brigades in all of those locations, and that they need to be combat credible. And because of that, President Biden then chose to make this announcement in Madrid, which again, I would consider to be a pretty big deal. So the NATO response force, we have 40,000 troops right now earmarked for the NATO response force that are deployable on 15 days notice. You heard the Secretary General talk about an aspiration to widen the pool of forces to a much larger set of forces that will be on high alert to be deployed within a few days. Those forces will be kind of assigned to NATO regional plans, but are separate from the commitments that the United States is making in Romania. The big question that's on the table is not only how will this war end and how soon will Russia stop this aggression inside Ukraine, but what will happen going forward? Will Putin, despite the fact that he lacks the capability to do so, will he decide still to try to go to Kyiv again? This is an open question. I think many of us would like to be able to somehow get into his head to understand what the game plan is. There, I actually have to salute our friends in Romania for not only meeting the 2% target, but for pledging to go beyond it to 2.5%. Secretary Austin in the United States has said that the 2% goal is actually a floor, not a ceiling, and Romania will really set the bar for other allies to consider additional increases above the 2%. Romania, that's been incredibly innovative and creative in trying to come up with ways to get the grain out, which is obviously a priority not only for the transatlantic allies, but really, frankly, for the world. And Romania's leadership on this front has been indispensable. They've very creatively started thinking about laying down gauges, train gauges that match the trains that are coming out. I know there's a mismatch between what exists in Ukraine versus what's in the rest of Eastern Europe. And I heard firsthand yesterday from some of your policymakers some of the efforts that have been made to try and close that gap. We've also heard about efforts that are being taken in regards to the Danube, again, showing remarkable leadership and innovation in that regard, and we salute Romania for those efforts and hope that they can grow over time. Obviously, a priority for the United States is to get this grain out. On the question of whether or not Ukraine is getting the assistance it needs in the moment, I mean, look, I'll say their needs are evolving and changing from week to week. And what we've tried to do through this, you may have heard about this effort, it's kind of informally referred to as the Ramstein Contact Group because the first meeting was in Ramstein. I think the official title is the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. In any case, what the United States is doing there is bringing together all of the nations that are providing security assistance to Ukraine, sitting them around one table. And this is not just NATO allies. These are countries from all over. We've got Australia at the table, our other Asian partners, really from many corners around the world, to sit down and look at the list of requirements that the Ukrainians are giving us on a regular basis, assessing whether or not each ally has the ability to meet those requirements, and then pairing them with countries that have that particular capability. Now, the needs have changed. As I said, we began the war with a heavy, heavy emphasis on air defense for all the obvious reasons. We've transitioned over time to things like coastal defense, ammunition, armored vehicles. We talk to the Ukrainians regularly to hear how they're assessing their security requirements. So it's a work in progress, which is why we've already had 3 meetings of this group, and there will be more in the future, hopefully the not too distant future. And I think this coordination cell is working well. It's also working well to have conversations about how to close the gap between a country that has pledged support, but then will deliver it in a few months' time. So you want to close that timeline, and sometimes it means pairing them with a country that has transport. There are certain countries that have transport but don't want to provide assistance, so you take that country and pair it with the country that has the lethal assistance. Well, I think I can speak on behalf of all the allies when I say that NATO allies find a lot of the rhetoric that President Putin is throwing around as it relates to nuclear weapons to be extremely dangerous and troubling, to say the least. And allies have been closely watching not only what Putin is saying in regards to nuclear weapons and the use of tactical nuclear weapons, but also the repositioning of nuclear weapons in places like Belarus. We're monitoring that closely. We're also trying to look at what Russia is actually doing with any capabilities it has at the moment. We've sent strong signals. You've heard President Biden talk about serious consequences, how the alliance, how the United States would push back if that came to pass. So this is a moment where the alliance is not only looking at how it can support Ukraine in this moment during the war, but is taking this rhetoric and this use of language on nuclear weapons very, very seriously.